New manager, new era, same ambition. In his very first season, Hansi Flick led FC Barcelona to a domestic treble as they reclaimed their throne in La Liga. They played with fire, with flair and with fearlessness, through the sparkle of youth and the rugged experience of their senior players. From title-defining Clasicos to comeback wins, this was a season of belief, brilliance and redemption. Join myself, Luke and Ollie here at LALIGA Talks as we relive every twist of Barcelona's trophy-laden journey. Should we just dive straight in and look at Barcelona's journey, starting from literally match day one when they faced Valencia, one of the clubs you really like, of course.
Yeah, I mean that was going to Valencia. It was in Mestalla. I remember they hadn't released their third kit yet, so they were wearing last season's yellow and red Catalan coloured kit, and I remember Lamine having a massive influence on that game, and that was something that we would begin to expect for the rest of the season. But yeah, the team hit the ground running. You know, they won so many games early on and they built up a lead. While Real Madrid were kind of trying to work out their system, incorporating Mbappe into their system, Flick had established a style that he wanted to play with, and he had players like Lewandowski and Rafinha leading them to victory, and they gained a lot of momentum early on in the season.
Lewandowski is an important name there. I mean, like we said, I think 7 games straight away, 7 wins. Lewandowski got a brace in that first game against Valencia on a 2-1 win. What were the other noticeable results there for you when we look back at these now?
I remember the Rayo Vallecano game probably for bad memories, because unfortunately Bernal in the last minute of that Rayo Vallecano game did his cruciate, which meant he was out for the season. But that was a standout moment. Obviously the 7-0 Valladolid.
The first goal fest, first time we saw in La Liga what they were capable of, right up front.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then even the Catalan derby against Girona, I remember, again, Lamine had a massive game there. But I think something that was evident in these early games, especially the Valladolid, Girona and Villarreal game, was that this Barca team were going to score a lot of goals.
Exactly. I mean, if you look now at the table now, of course, we've got the luxury of doing that. 5-1 over Villarreal away from home. I mean, that should have spelled out a little bit, right? Villarreal have had an incredible season. And that should have told us at that moment, if we didn't know already, that this team they meant business, right?
And then even in that game, you can see Rafinha with a brace, Lewandowski with a brace. So Flick luckily had a striker in his team who he'd worked with before, who he trusted, and Lewandowski certainly took that, the faith that Hansi Flick had in him. Obviously, Ferran Torres was there, and we know how well he's played this year. But Lewandowski, with that experience, really added a lot to that front three.
So there was a streak of matches there leading up to the first El Clasico, which we'll go into in a moment. But do you remember any hiccups during these first few games?
Well, yeah, they had one defeat against Osasuna. Flick was trying to find the balance between getting consistency with the starting 11, but also conserving the energy of players like Lewandowski, players like Pedri, who, again, early on in the season, we began to realise what an impact he was going to have on this team. But I think Flick needed to rotate at times, and I remember Lamine didn't start that Osasuna game, and it was a bit of a nightmare performance from them. But I do remember, even in a game where Barca lost, Lamine scored an absolute screamer in that game. So it was just a bit of a hiccup, but then obviously heading into El Clasico, they continued their good form. They had a couple of big wins in the Champions League. They beat Young Boys 5-0. They beat Bayern 4-1, which for me was one of the most memorable weeks of the season, I would say.
Rafinha hat-trick.
Yeah, exactly. It was like that Champions League game, it was a Rafinha hat-trick, but I remember that was the first time of the season where Lamine had one of those performances where it felt like he could just do whatever he wanted, and it was just like every time he got the ball, he was dribbling at Alphonso Davies. I remember him taking on Kimmich, and it was just like, wow, that was the same week he won the Copa Trophy, and it was leading in to this Clasico, so you can imagine, coming off a 4-1 victory against Flick's old side, next up was El Clasico. at the Bernabeu. Certainly in the first half of the season outperforming their XG because they were so clinical.
So clinical.
Like the
so
Rafinha dink, the Lewandowski header, the Lewandowski finish, and then Lamin's goal even on his right foot. Like, it was a clinical display. And all the goals were world class. And yeah, it was a real treat to watch that Clasico.
So there's a massive El Clasico win, as we discussed, and they beat Espanyol just after that game, just like they did recently when they won the title.
Yeah.
Now, I was there, I thought, wow, this Barcelona team, nobody's going to stop them. There's absolutely no chance now. From hardly thinking about them almost to thinking they'll definitely win a Liga, they suddenly dropped off a cliff.
Yeah, it was a difficult period for Barca just after that Clasico in November.
Yep.
November, December was really a difficult couple of months for them. I think they came out of the blocks so good, it was kind of inevitable that they were going to have a rocky patch. And that came after two big wins, the Real Madrid game and then the Barcelona derby against Espanyol. After that, they had to go to Real Sociedad away. And I remember that being a very tight game, very tight margins.
Yep.
I remember Lewandowski had a goal disallowed, and Sociedad really took one of the chances that they had in that game. Then again, a difficult away game to Celta Vigo. That was a 2-2 draw. This is where the form started to go really bad because they then hosted Las Palmas and lost 2-1. Difficult. One of the only positives of that period of time was the Mallorca game, which was actually the first time I got to see Barca in the flesh this season. And they were away to Mallorca and they won 5-1, and that was
incredibly lucky, really, to see that sort of result in this patch of form.
Yeah, I know, it was lucky for me, and I remember Rafinha again stepped up massively that day. Lamine had one of those Trivela assists. So I think, as I mentioned just now, in the first part of the season, Barca were outperforming their XG, and I think through this patch, they weren't. Their finishing was off.
Yes.
They were creating the chances, they just couldn't score the goals. And sometimes that happens in football. Like, you can't always be clinical, you know.
Exactly, and one match really stands out from where that point would be most prominent. Yeah. The putting the ball in the back of the net against Atletico Madrid, right? Yeah. And that was one of the real. If this season had gone differently, this would have been one of the defining moments, I'm sure. Yeah. Dominating Atleti for the 90 minutes. But conceding a last gasp goal to Sorloth, who'd become famous for that through the season, for Atletico to actually go to the top of the league at that point. So at that point you're thinking, wow, completely changed, we're going to have the most incredible title race. Yeah. But Barcelona now in third place, looking like they had slipped off totally.
Yeah, that was a crazy game, and I remember Pedri was man of the match in that game. He scored, he literally completely controlled the game, but that was an example of a perfectly executed Diego Simeone snatch and grab victory that we've seen so many times away from home over the years, even this season in fact. And yeah, it was a bit worrying for this Barca side because they're a young team, they're inexperienced in ways, so I think the Barcelona fans would have been worried that they wouldn't be able to recover from this dip in form. And with the standard of teams around them in Atleti and Real Madrid, you thought they've missed their chance. You know, you can't have four. So after the Mallorca game, they didn't win a game for 4 games. Like, that isn't championship winning form at all.
No.
And yeah, we've seen what they had to do to recover.
So the new year saw a massive upturn in Barcelona's form, as we're saying, but also the arrival of a very important figure this season, Wojciech Szczesny.
Yeah.
How did that ever happen? I heard rumours that Lewandowski called him up and said, please come out of retirement and play from us. So from someone who was retired to now a treble winner, it's pretty incredible, right?
Yeah, it was quite a funny story because obviously Ter Stegen picked up that cruciate injury against Villarreal early on in the season. So initially, Szczesny obviously retired last season. He was on the beach in Mallorca, I think, and they needed him to come in to be like a backup keeper. I don't think the intention was ever for him to become first choice. And Iñaki Peña stepped into the role of Ter Stegen once he got injured. But then, with the downturn in form, Flick gave Szczesny a chance early on in January, and really from there, he never looked back, and that kind of coincided with Barca's upturn in form. And I'll be honest, like in the first month, he didn't have like the best start. There was a few dodgy moments, but it kind of made sense. He was coming off
experience,
out of retirement, and you need to get back up to match pace and things like that. But what he's gone on to achieve this season, and how important he's actually become with some incredible like individual performances. This Szczesny
big
story.
Saves.
Honestly, I think it's my favourite story in football in years.
Yeah.
For someone to come off the beach, you know, to come straight into this Barca team and lead them to a domestic treble it's absolutely astounding, to be honest.
It is. So let's go back to the results we saw at the start of the year. So there was 2 massive goal fests in 2 different competitions. The first La Liga game of the first La Liga win of the new year, 7-1 against Valencia.
Yeah.
I mean,
this
wow.
was interesting because Valencia just brought in Corberán, and Valencia at this stage were doing so poorly that it felt like they were not focusing on the Barca game, the Real Madrid, like the bigger teams where they didn't want to use all their energy in a game like that.
They weren't expecting to get 3 points there, right?
So Barca made the most of that, an absolute goal fest. And then a couple of weeks later, then it was the game against Benfica, which was 5-4 in the rain in Lisbon, and we saw that Rafinha last-minute goal. And I feel like that's where the remontada of Barcelona kind of started this season. We began to see that no matter how many goals were scored against them, Barcelona always had that belief that they would score more, which is going back to the Johan Cruyff philosophy, which is so embedded in Football Club Barcelona. It's really nice that Flick kind of adopted parts of that style and implemented them in his own system, and it was cool that we got to witness that plenty of times in the second half of the season. Barca never down and out and constantly a threat, and yeah, that was incredible that night in Lisbon.
Definitely. Now, we spoke a lot about the goals. I think we need to speak about how the defence performed there. We started to see more clean sheets, right, in the defence that not many had expected to perform, maybe. I mean, you had the new sort of leadership of Inigo Martinez in there. Kubasi, who was this Rolls Royce of a defender at 18 years old. What did you make of their defence and how it performed through this period of the season?
Yeah, that was one of the revelations of the season, I would say, is Inigo Martinez, who was kind of out of favour under Xavi. Flick came in and gave him a very big leadership role in this defence alongside the young but brilliant Kubasi, and that partnership really became key for this Barca team because, as we say, the high line is such an important part of this Flick system. So the fact that Martinez and Kubasi were leading that line in terms of deciding when to step up and when to play the offside trap, it was really impressive that like the youthfulness of Kubasi and the experience of Inigo Martinez, who I think's 35, Kubasi's 18, they were brilliant. Not to forget the incredible seasons that both fullbacks had.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Balde, he's been great, hasn't he?
Balde, but probably Mr. Consistent for Barca this season has been Jules Koundé.
This is true.
And also the relationship that he has with Kubasi, but also Lamine, and the defensive solidity that he gives them on that right side, which means Lamine can kind of gamble on the last man and stay up at times. This Barcelona defence, even though they concede a lot of goals, they're very impressive.
Yeah.
And I just think like as ball playing defenders, there's very few better in the world than that back four.
Exactly. Now, continue on with 2025, right? So we see them fighting in all competitions. 17, 18 games without a loss to kick off the season up until they lose to Inter Milan. Now, we'll jump into that in a moment, but do you remember any other important results, any big games? Did you get to watch any, for example?
We were treated to a 4-2 Barça comeback in the Metropolitano in La Liga.
Yes, we were. God, such a busy season. I could barely remember it for a sec. What a game that was to watch.
Exactly, and at the time we kind of knew the significance of that, because that was when the title race was kind of a 3-horse race at that point, and it really felt like Atleti, if they had taken that opportunity, they could have gone on to have a real say in this title race. And
they looked like they were going to, right? Let's jump into that game, because that was absolutely brilliant. One of the classics of this season. They raced to a 2-0 lead, right?
Yeah, so it was, and again, a very good Diego Simeone game plan. Allow Barca to have the ball and catch them on the break. And around that time as well, Julian Alvarez became unstoppable. You know, he was banging in the goals in all competitions, and we've seen how good he was in the Champions League for Atleti, and then he really took on a leadership role in that Atleti team and scored a lot of goals. So he scored, then Sorla scored early on in the second half, I remember, and it was a bit like, felt like this Barca team were a bit shell-shocked, but as I said, having gained that experience in the Benfica game when they were down multiple times this season, they've been down, they had that belief, and they had a comeback, ended up being 4-2. I think Lewandowski scored a crazy goal, I remember, to make it 2-1.
Great goal that was, great goal.
And then Lamine, classic cut in from the right. A bit of fortune, I remember it was a deflection, but he stepped up in that moment. Then it was just like 2 quick-fire Varane goals.
The celebrations were crazy, weren't they? The celebrations were wild. What a game that was.
Yeah, the Metropolitano was certainly shocked that night, and Simeone was, wow, the contrast between complete jubilee at 2-0 to being completely distraught at 4-2. I remember his son Giuliano after the game coming out to do interviews, and they were all distraught because it was so close to being like such a pivotal game for them in the season, and it ended up really probably
unfolding.
A downturn for them after that game.
Their campaign almost sort of unfolded at that point, didn't it?
Exactly.
So jumping back then to the Inter Milan loss. Obviously, it's one of the defining points of Barcelona. Even though it's been incredibly successful, if there's anywhere to point, you'd point there, right? Maybe a little bit of naivety at the end.
I don't know. All that needs to be remembered for me for those games was, I think it was one of the greatest 2-legged ties in the history of the Champions League.
I couldn't agree more.
Just pure attacking football. It was like a basketball game at times, but also like big players stepped up, and I think it was Lamine's best 2 games.
I could say his greatest,
Even in the second leg, he was outrageous, and they couldn't get the victory. But I think
I just remember that last minute chance they had in that game. I was just thinking, in a few years' time, that's getting stuck away as well, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. But even though his finishing wasn't on point throughout both legs, I really think that was the game where people realised that he is maybe already the best player in the world, but he will go on to be like such a huge figure in football because of his unique style, which you don't see as much anymore in wingers. The fact that every time he gets the ball, he's so unpredictable. You don't know whether he's going to cut in. You don't know whether he's going to take in the outside. You don't know whether he's going to give a Treble pass into the box.
His decision making at his age is it's ridiculous, really, isn't it? And you know he must be good because he's getting given the right, not saying he's not a hard worker, but he gets given the right not to have to track back all the time. There's very few players who get that at Barcelona. Maybe this is the moment to mention Messi on that same side. You just allow him to do what he needs to do because he'll change the game for you. Barca's
team never know when they're down and out, and as you say, towards the end, that a bit of naivety, that youthfulness, like
that's almost that stubbornness,
the fearlessness to say, oh, we have an attack, let's not bring it to the corner, let's go for another goal. And ultimately, 2 minutes changed their season from being a triple, quadruple to then heartbreak, and that was a huge moment in the season.
We need to talk about that. I was just thinking that we need to talk about that Copa del Rey final because, again, just as you mentioned from the Inter Milan game, and how long was the Copa del Rey final before the Inter Milan game? It felt like it was all quite condensed.
It was all close.
So they were spending energy everywhere. I mean, that Copa del Rey game, it was through the extra time as well. Inter Milan, the same.
Yeah.
Now, yeah.
In terms of like Real Madrid and them facing them, I suppose that Copa del Rey game was interesting because the first game was 4-0. The Supercopa de España was 5-1. And then the Copa del Rey ended up being 3-2 and we saw Real Madrid come back. So it felt like Ancelotti had kind of worked out a way to maybe beat this Barca team.
See, I have a theory. I have a theory about this, right? The final, I almost felt like Barcelona felt they had Real Madrid's number and came into that final thinking, right, it's a cup final performance. Mm-hmm. We're going to show you that we can beat you on your terms as well. Yeah. We'll just face you up. We won't keep possession for possession's sake at all. And we'll just face you up and we'll see who scores more goals. Yeah. I felt they always felt confident they were going to win that game, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was also interesting because Mbappe didn't start that Copa del Rey final and Barca got that lead and then Mbappe came on and had a huge impact scoring that direct free kick. And then a few minutes later, Tchouaméni scored. And yeah, it was, I suppose Lamine said it after the game. What did he say?
Doesn't matter how many goals they score this season, they just can't beat us.
And that's really what it was like in that Copa del Rey final. So I think they were taking that mentality into this La Liga El Clasico, which was basically to win the league. And we all know how it ended. 4-3, one of the greatest Clásicos we've seen in recent years.
Yeah,
maybe
ever. You're not going to see a better game, I'm sure. That is incredible. And I think this is a moment we can use to look at some of the celebrations there on that game because that was incredible.
Yeah, luckily I was pitch side for that, so I saw it all up close, and I was on the Barca side for both halves. So obviously Real Madrid go into this early lead, Mbappe penalty, Mbappe 1-on-1 which he finished, and I was like, wow, this Inter game has had an effect on this Barca team because the lead that Real Madrid opened the game up with was, I would say, a bit worrying for the Barca fans.
Yes.
But it felt like, again, the Barca teams trust their system, trust how they can play, and all of a sudden they scored like 4 goals in 20 minutes. It was 4-2 at half time.
Flipped it on its head,
Yeah, and it was they were completely unstoppable all of a sudden. And I think it became a theme towards the end of the season, like, for the opposition, it's nearly better if they don't score early. Yeah. As in, like, if the opposition scores early,
particularly if you're Real Madrid, right? That wasn't the first time it happened with them either.
There's going to be an onslaught from Barca. If the game is like a bit of a scrappy game, nip and tuck, then you might actually be able to grind out a result. But if you score early, it means you have to sit back, try and deal with this onslaught of pressure from Barca, and then we saw what happened. It was ridiculous. Eric Garcia, who actually deserves an honourable mention, his performances over the last 5-6 weeks of the season have been incredible. When
a few goals in there as well.
Yeah, Koundé's been injured and he stepped up in the Inter game, and then to step up in the Clasico, he completely pocketed Vinicius in that game, and then he scored the first goal of the game. Yeah. And then Lamine, like, again.
It feels like we're just going to keep saying it, doesn't it? Because I had, if we were to look at the Ballon d'Or rankings, for example, and think who was most likely to win it, which is always a good metric, right, to see how someone's doing. I thought Rafinha was the shoo-in from the Barca team, just because of the numbers. But these last months, what Lamine's done has been so incredible that I think you should look away from numbers sometimes. I think there was one famous one, Ronaldinho one, which he scored maybe 14, 15 goals or something like that, and he won Ballon d'Or. And I think that's the way we should be looking at Lamine Yamal. For me, he's simply been the best player in the world this season.
Yeah, agreed. And as you say, the last few weeks he stepped up in the biggest games, and his performance in El Clasico was outrageous because he scored an incredible goal, a perfect finish, but he also set Rafinha up for about 3 or 4 tap-ins, which he didn't score.
Should add his hat-trick.
There was a couple of disallowed goals. Yeah. He had such an incredible impact on the game, and now it just seems like every time he gets the ball, he's going to create something, whereas before he shone in moments, but now he's shining for a whole 90 minutes every time he touches the ball. And the Clasico was ridiculous. We obviously had that Fermin disallowed goal in the 95th minute, which I was involved in the celebrations, as was everyone who was sidelined, all the photographers. We were all getting involved, and that felt like the moment that Barca won the league. Obviously, it was disallowed due to a handball in the build-up, but even still, the jubilation and glee which I felt from the players and you could feel in the stadium, that's a moment I'll never forget. One of the best moments of my life, I'd say.
I mean, you're a very, very lucky person, I think, because it would stretch that jubilation, wouldn't it, into the next week? Because then, just like earlier in the season, it went from Real Madrid to Catalan rivals Espanyol. Now, this was now the game to win the La Liga title.
Yeah, it's funny how it happens. 2 years ago, the same fixture to win the league, and it came around again in the RCD stadium. And yeah, I was there again for that game. Quite an interesting proposition for Barcelona, because obviously Espanyol are a huge rival, and you're not going to get too many Barca fans in the Espanyol stadium. So I think the game plan there was just get the job done. It doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter what way we do it. Hansi was like, we win the game, we win the league, we celebrate in the dressing room, we get out of there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened.
I think you're quite right to talk about how tough Espanyol could have been that day. We saw them beat Real Madrid only weeks earlier, right? And they're a team that, right until the final day, are going to be looking to survive relegation.
Yeah, and actually, their home forms, they've been really hard to beat at home this season. And yeah, we've seen a few upsets from them, I guess you said, against Real Madrid and stuff. So I think, obviously, the Clasico hangover as well, which is often can be a factor. All the emotional effort and physical effort that you expend on a game like a Clasico. Sometimes a game after you're not hitting your heights.
Yeah.
But
this one was probably different, right? Because I think they won that Clasico, and with that Clasico win, even though there was this big rival game, I think at that point it was probably done for them, wasn't it? 7 points clear that took them.
Yeah, exactly. They just needed to win one of their last 3 games.
Yeah.
First half was actually Espanyol played very well, and Barca were struggling to break the team down. But it was calling out for someone to step up, and multiple players this season have stepped up for Barca, especially in the front 3. But it only felt right that in the last few weeks, Lamine stepped up and he scored the goal to win Barca the league, and it was a trademark Lamine goal, cuts in from the right, and especially this goal. The burst of pace he shows off the first touch to give him a few yards of space, and a left foot strike. He couldn't be any further in the top corner.
Absolutely incredible goal.
And I was sitting on his side, so I wasn't in front of the celebration, but I saw the whole thing from him cutting in and just looking into top corner and just being absolutely mind blown by the capabilities of this young lad, 17 years old.
Unbelievable scenes here. Lamine Yamal just scored a screamer, cuts in from the right hand side, that famous left foot, top corner, 1-0 to Barca.
And doing exactly what he wants in a football.
Lucky people, I think, at this point to see this young boy.
To see the rise of Lamine Yamal, it might be the most important part of the Lamine Yamal story, to get to this level at this young age.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's a real privilege to see. Then we obviously saw Fermin got his 95th minute goal in the Espanyol game, which is very weird, the fact that his goal from Clasico, his moment of jubilation, was taken away from him. He stepped up again, and Fermin
another one of the players,
so many goals recently, and he looks like he's going to be a massive part of this Barca team going forward.
Some group they've got there, isn't it?
Yeah.
You spoke there about Lamine's goal. It would only be a few days later again where we'd see it almost replicated, right?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, Barca couldn't celebrate the title at the home of their rivals. That was never going to happen.
It was a quick 1 or 2 minutes on the pitch. The sprinklers soon put them into the dressing room, and yeah, we were pitch side at the end of the game, going to see maybe when the stadium was empty, maybe the players would come out, but no, it was all done behind closed doors in the dressing room. The only people we've seen emerge from the tunnel was Laporta and some of the members of the board who took photos on the pitch at the end of the game, but there was no sign of the Barca players, and I'd say they got on the bus and they went straight to the Ciudad Deportiva to to celebrate. We saw Casado on the Rambla, you know, taking it all in with the fans. And then, the celebration was really on Sunday against Villarreal.
They'd only wait a few days, right? Back at home against Villarreal. Another incredible goal, almost bored of saying it at this point, but the celebrations again were great to see, weren't they?
Oh yeah, it was the opportunity for them to celebrate with their fans. They'd had the parade, but last dance in Montjuic before they returned to the new camp. Beautiful scenes, even though they didn't even get the victory on the day. Marcelino's Villarreal, who've had probably the most underrated season. They've been just quietly going about their business.
Yeah.
Beating big teams, consistently beating the teams they should be beating. Now they've secured Champions League football in 5th place. And then they beat the champions. So hats off to Villarreal, who've had a fantastic season.
We will speak about them in this season break.
Nothing was gonna take away from the Barcelona celebrations. I'm sure the players are worn out celebrating at this stage. They've had the Supercopa, they've had the Copa del Rey, La Liga, Parade, and now this Sunday night celebrations. So
not a bad first season for Hansi Flick, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's incredible the impact he's had, and I don't know. It's even more impressive the fact he doesn't even speak Spanish and the impact he's had on this team.
Yeah.
And the camaraderie we can see from the team and him. There's lots of videos of Flick portraying fatherly actions to his team, you know, because he's got
the one holding Fermin back.
Yeah, there's a lot of loose cannons in that team. Gavi, Fermin, who need a helping hand sometimes from a fatherly figure, and it seems like Hansi's earned the respect of the players, and he loves his players and they love him, and that's going to be key going forward for this Barcelona team. And he is, he's such a manager, you know, such a leader, has high standards. You wouldn't want to be on the bad side of him either, because when he's angry, I'd say
he knows how to. Well, we saw it at the start of the season, right? And something we didn't mention actually, his style that he imprinted early on. Mm-hmm. You saw players sit out for disciplinary reasons early on. Koundé was one of them, I believe. If you turned up late, Peña was another. If you turned up late to training or you weren't doing what he wanted you to do, he showed, like you said, that tougher side of him, which maybe Barcelona were lacking in the season before.
Just certain standards that you have to hit. Timekeeping is one of the most important ones for Flick, and we've seen so many clips this season of the players running to the bus to make sure they're on time. Yeah, and they've kind of made a game out of it, you know, and that adds an element of camaraderie to the group as well, because you can joke around with people if they're late, or you can have a laugh if you just arrive on time. That's all these small details that all add up to create a winning mentality, and Barca have done that this season. It's been a season to remember, even though it could have been Champions League 2. I'd say all the Barca fans and Flick and anyone involved with the club would have taken this at the start of the season. It's been a historic season for Football Club Barcelona.
It has. It's certainly been a wonderful season, but we're going to end the show with one important question. Ollie, how do you fancy them retaining the title next year?
Well, the scary thing is Lamin's turning 18 this summer. Rumours of him taking the number 10 jersey next season, which hopefully he can embrace that number. But yeah, this Barca team are so young. You know, what was there, 9 La Masia products played in the Clasico. Yeah. They're only going to get better. It's whether players like Lewandowski can continue this vein of form, 36, 37 years of age. Whether they need to look to buy another striker. They have Ferran there, but there's rumours of other strikers coming in. But I just think Flick just needs to capitalise on this momentum and keep this team operating at this level. And it really depends how Real Madrid, what happens next season with them. Yeah. Possibility of new manager coming in.
There's a lot of talk new manager coming, isn't there? Ex-player, ex-legend.
Yeah, so there's so much to say, but I think they have the best player in the world, and that's always going to give you a boost. So I imagine they will retain the title next season.
Cool.
And I imagine Lamine will win the Ballon d'Or and go on to create a dynasty at Barcelona. Believable. And yeah, thanks for everything.
No, thank you too, Ollie. Right, guys, make sure you like and subscribe the videos. We love making this sort of content for you.
Leave your comments below. What have you made of Barca's season? Who's been your player of the season? Who's been the standout performers? What do you think of Flick's impact on this team? So many talking points. And yeah, make sure you hit that like button.